Before we begin our normal programming, we'd like to take a moment and pause to stand with the families and victims in Uvalde, Texas. We know that within our community, this loss is felt with particular concern for the children and families we all work with. The depth of suffering in this moment cannot be understated. We will now pause in remembrance and with the reminder that gun violence must end through policy reform now. With the COVID pandemic in mind, our 2022 speaker series focuses on overall health, mental and physical. In addition to our speakers, during each session, the UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center will offer a mindfulness exercise. I am now pleased to introduce Dr. Marvin Belzer. For those of you new to our series, Dr. Belzer has taught mindfulness meditation for 20 years. He is an adjunct associate professor in the UCLA Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences. He teaches an undergraduate course at UCLA and mindfulness in many different venues.
Thank you, Arushi. It's a pleasure to be here. I've really enjoyed being part of these sessions over the past few months. And I see Alma has a hand up. Just make sure. Alma, did you have a question about interpretation or logistics in any way? Okay, maybe you can, if you can enter into chat if you need something. I'll be on for about 12 minutes with a basic introduction to mindfulness. And so I'll talk for a few minutes about what mindfulness is and how we practice mindfulness in meditation. And then we'll do a meditation together. I realize that not everyone here today may want to engage in the meditation, so that's fine. The information still may be useful. And then I will talk briefly about some of the practical applications of mindfulness. So mindfulness is a capacity that we have. It's not something that we have to figure out or create. It's the ability to be aware of what's happening in our experience as it happens, what we can hear and see and taste and feel in our bodies and smell and the thoughts and the emotions we have. So it's part of normal human consciousness. And there are ways of refining and deepening this capacity. And the emerging science around mindfulness is showing that it can help us with both mental and physical health. And this can be hard to believe because what we're going to do is so simple. It really, even after 30 years of doing this seriously and practicing a lot, it still can be surprising, the difference it can make. So what we do in the meditation, I like to break into two parts. The first is we direct our attention to something actually happening in our experience. And we choose something relatively neutral, meaning not terribly stimulating. And it is as simple as, if you can see the screen, if you can see my hand, you can ask yourself to focus your attention on my hand. Please do. This is how easy it is to meditate. You know, all the places you could look, and when my other hand starts doing something weird, you can still exert a little bit of effort to keep the primary focus on that other hand, right? So this is what we do. Most form, there are dozens of types of meditation that I know about, probably many I don't. But most that I'm familiar with begin this way, focusing attention in a very simple way. And the reason we do this is there's something about this mental activity which works to cultivate more calmness, clarity, stability, and so forth in our experience. And we can do this without clearing our minds or doing something else that's sort of impossible just by sheer willpower, right? We do it right in the midst of whatever is happening, whatever emotions we may have, we can still do this. So that's the first part. I'll guide you in this in a minute when we begin. The second part is, even though it is doable and ordinary people like us can do it, all the same, there will be those moments when we realize, oh, I was trying to stay with the feel of my breath, but we've been daydreaming or worried about something, or a random memory came to mind, and then that led to another thought and another so this happens. It's quite normal. And what we do in mindfulness practice is when we realize the attention has been pulled away, then we include whatever is happening as part of the meditation, meaning just know what's happening. It's just, I'm thinking. If it's an emotion, which often there will be emotion, whatever it is, we try to feel it in our bodies. So this can take some practice for many of us, just to feel the physical, visceral component of the emotion, whatever it may be, anxiety, fear, grief, joy, and then gently bring the attention back to the breath or wherever we were trying to focus. So this is just one model for thinking about it. I think it's a good model. We focus attention. I'll guide you in this. We'll use ambient sounds. We'll use sensations in our bodies. And then when you notice that your attention has drifted, no, you haven't failed. It's part of human intelligence in a way for our minds to move quickly from one thing to another. So we just simply include whatever is happening and then gently come back. So let's take 5 minutes for the meditation if you wish to participate. If you don't wish to, please don't. One reason I'm good at teaching undergrads is I don't assume I know what they should do, right? And so I love teaching it, I love sharing it, but there is a lot of, it's very individual, right? It's very personal. So just engage as much as you wish. So eyes can be open or closed. You might take a few deeper breaths as we begin, slightly deeper in breath and out breath. Yeah, even a little sigh with the out breath. It's just one way to begin. Then letting your breath be normal. We'll come back to the breath in a minute. For now, just notice the sounds you can hear. Whatever's happening in your environment, in the midst of everything else that may be happening for you, just notice you can focus on the sounds. And notice how easy this is. The sounds come to us. We don't have to censor any sounds. We don't have to keep track of everything. Just notice this changing flow of sounds. It's a mental activity, this focusing, sustaining attention that really is the catalyst for more calmness, stability, clarity of mind. It is quite doable. We don't have to, it's not complicated. It takes a little effort, but it's mostly patience. So you can stay with sounds if you wish, come back to sounds whenever you wish. It's also good to practice with our bodies. So when you wish to, let your attention settle into your body and just notice some sensations you can feel in your head, shoulders, arms, hands, torso, legs, feet. Again, just normal stuff. What's happening? Vibration, pressure, softness. So we feel into our bodies. It can be natural to notice sensations connected with the breath. The abdomen and chest, like moving, tensing with the in-breath, sort of falling, softening, dissolving with the out-breath. Sensations at the nose as air enters, as air leaves. So how do you know that you're breathing? Based on sensations. Wherever you feel is good enough. Maybe let your attention rest there for the next couple minutes as best you can. Just knowing when the in-breath begins, when the out-breath begins. And this is, it's not a test. We're not trying to be perfect. And as I mentioned, our minds will drift. Other things will come to mind. Our intelligence kicks in. We start trying to figure out a problem. So just notice when that happens. Just a recognition of thinking. Often emotion is in the neighborhood. Some degree of excitement, fear, anxiety, grief, and so forth. Just it's a permission to be real, just to notice what it feels like, even at the level of the sensations in our bodies, often in the torso, and then reconnect back to the breath or somewhere else, hands or feet or sounds. So I'll be silent for a minute and then ring a bell, simply to end the meditation. So thank you. It's good to meditate with you. If by the way, if your response when I rang the bell was, hey, wait a minute, I was just getting started. Okay, maybe you learned something that is useful. This is definitely something that we can practice. It's available to ordinary people like all of us. It's after 30 years of doing this, as I said, I still am surprised at how it can be helpful. Just very briefly about a couple of applications that kind of make vivid how we use this. One of them, probably the most widely used clinical application of mindfulness, is with pain management, physical pain. And the idea is, more can be said about this, but just briefly, it's like if my right shoulder is in pain, then I focus somewhere else, my hands, the breath, sounds, somewhere else that's not painful, just as we just did. And then pain being what it is, it will tend to intrude, right? It'll tend to draw our attention. And in those moments, we do something a little bit counterintuitive, because in the meditation, first of all, we assume that if we're meditating, we don't need to be driving to the hospital, right? So it's chronic pain. It's pain that we don't need to act on it. And what we do is simply feel it. Maybe just for a few seconds, just, if it's my right shoulder, like what's going on there? And this can be counterintuitive, and it can take some practice, and it's all very gentle. And there's always that permission to shift the attention back somewhere else. But this is the core of what we do. And of course, more could be said, but it really is that simple. And the promise is not that it will make the pain disappear, but the science does support the claim that it helps us manage pain better, and so forth. So very similar sort of way of practicing with emotions like anxiety and grief and loneliness, normal human emotions. It's like we focus attention somewhere else when we realize that, oh yeah, I feel sad, I feel angry. In the meditation, we don't have to manage the emotions. We can just take that opportunity to notice what it's like. What do they feel like? And so even when our goal is to manage these emotions better, the activity is to actually feel what it is, to give ourselves permission just to be real, and with that emphasis on what we can feel in our bodies. But again, no obligation to stay there. So as with pain, shifting attention back to the breath or the hands is always okay. So this is the core of mindfulness. As I'm sure I made this joke in earlier sessions, it's the less time I have, the better I teach, because it helps me get to the point. And it is quite actually simple. It's not easy to do, but it is something that we can do. And at UCLA, at the Mindful Awareness Research Center, we do offer classes and so forth. We have a free app, which is called UCLA Mindful. And these are also available on our website, where we also have the meditations in, I think, 13 different languages, including Spanish. And so thank you for your attention today. It's been good to be here again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Belzer. I'm now pleased to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Lauren. Dr. Lauren is the Director of Learning and Development for the Division of Population Behavioral Health, the Nathanson Family Resilience Center, and the Prevention Center of Excellence within the UCLA Jane and Terry Summill Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior. She is also an attending supervisor at UCLA's Stress, Trauma, and Resilience Clinic and the UCLA VA Veteran Family Wellbeing Center. Dr. Marlowe is a board-certified clinical and community psychologist, and she's completed a 2-year APA-accredited postdoctoral fellowship at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, where she specialized in working with adolescents, young adults, and their families. She currently oversees the content for the well-being for LA Learning Center, a learning management system to support trauma and resilience-informed practices throughout Los Angeles County's workforce.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Arushi, and thanks to the Pritzker Center for hosting today's event and the other speaker series. I'm happy to be here with you all today. I'm talking about one of my favorite topics, which ties in really nicely to our opening mindfulness exercise and little bit of didactic. I have some slides to share with you all, so I'm going to share my screen. And I'll tell you a little bit more about myself and why I'm interested in this work. I'm a clinical and community psychologist, so I'm really passionate about serving individual families as well as influencing larger systems. And my graduate school training was a very traditional clinical graduate program where I learned about different types of talk therapy, assessment, and psychological testing. And we learned about what back then was called cultural competency, but we didn't learn a ton about somatic treatment approaches. This was part of a research project that I did with an alumni from my program while I was in graduate school, but it wasn't a part of our core curriculum. I have since gone on to learn some more somatic treatments approaches, as well as study the benefits of practices such as yoga, trauma-informed yoga, mindfulness, and think about ways that this could be used in serving youth, serving families, specifically serving foster families, and how this can be a part of traditional mental health, how this can be a part of some of our preventative approaches. I also do a fair amount of work with our school systems, teaching psychiatric social workers and teachers how to infuse resilient skill building into their curricula and their school practices. And a lot of that overlaps with this somatic treatment approaches. I've had the opportunity to work with some foster youth in a clinical setting. I've also had the opportunity to use our existing resources with resilient skill building to adapt them to work with our UCLA Guardian scholars. And then I've also had the opportunity to work on our Focus on Foster Families app, which has a lot of resilient skill building approaches as well. So that's an introduction to me. Now I'll give you an introduction to what we are going to be doing today. I hope that you'll be able to walk away with understanding the unique mental health needs of foster youth. We'll have the opportunity to do several demonstrations of body-based interventions. They are all optional, but they're a part of today's presentation. I hope you'll be able to explain the physiological impact of stress on the body, and then finally be able to describe how the body's awareness of the impact of trauma, what that impact is and why it's so important. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat as I go along. I'll be able to address those and yeah, hopefully share some useful information with you all. we're going to start with a body scan. So for those of you that wanted more meditation, you're in luck. For those of you who were struggling a little bit with the meditation, notice that. All I ask you to do is just notice that may have been more challenging. So as much as possible, try to get very comfortable where you are. Not just a little comfortable, but very comfortable. If you're having, a little bit of discomfort in the way that you're standing or sitting, really wiggle around and try to get in a position that's comfortable. Sometimes it can be helpful to press the bottom of your feet into the floor to start this exercise. I like to use something to prop my feet up. I use yoga blocks and put my feet on there. If that's not available to you, it's okay. You could use books. You could use just the floor. You're also welcome to take a different position than you normally would be working today. So that means sitting on the floor or moving to a couch or raising or lowering your seat. If it means standing up for this exercise, you can be in any position. So I'm giving you a moment to get comfortable and to be very picky about getting comfortable. And you may want to press the bottom of your feet into the floor. You may want to keep them rested wherever you are. And if at any time you decide you don't want to do this exercise, that is fine. I just ask that you be respectful to those of us in this virtual room and, maybe take a moment to do what you need to do to take care of yourself if it's not engaging in this body scan. I'll invite you to pay attention to what's going on the top of your head. Is there any sensation? It may or may not be helpful to place a hand on the top of your head to really get that sensation. It's not, unless we have a headache, it's not something we think about a lot. What's going on inside of your skull? How's your forehead doing? How's your face? Is there any part that's feeling restricted or loose? Are you in a neutral, smiling or frowning facial expression? No judgment, just notice. Now I'll invite you to call attention to your neck. Are you feeling any tension, any pressure, any looseness, any lightness? Again, it might be helpful to gently place your hands on your neck if you're having a hard time tuning in. I'll invite you to move your attention to your shoulders. Is there sharpness, lightness, coolness, heat? What's going on with your shoulders? You're welcome to move as we do this. You're welcome to stay still. Now, I'll invite you to call your attention to what's going on in your arms. And again, it might be helpful to take one hand and touch one arm, take one hand and touch the other. This might be a nice way to get in tune with what's going on inside of my body. And if it doesn't feel right, you don't need to do it. I'll invite you to call your attention to your hands, your fingers, your wrists. Any sensations going on? When you're ready, I'll invite you to shift your attention to your torso, starting with your chest, your ribs, your belly and your back. Are there any sensations going on inside of your body, in your torso? Now I'll invite you to call your attention to your top part of your legs, your quads, your hamstrings. It feels good to gently move your legs to feel those muscles. You can do that. Or it might feel nice to sit in stillness. When you're ready, if you'd like to call your attention to your lower legs, your shins, your calves, maybe even your ankles. Again, it might be nice to put some movement. You might want to stay still. It's totally up to you. And when you're ready, I'll invite you to call your attention to your feet. The tops of your feet, your toes, and the bottom of your feet. Any sensations that are going on. We'll take one more moment and call your attention to your entire body from head to toe. If there's any sensations that are not pleasant, I'll invite you to call your attention to a sensation that's a little bit less unpleasant, neutral, or pleasant. And when you're ready, if you had your eyes closed, I'll invite you to open your eyes. If you participated in the scan today, I'll invite you to call your attention back to your screen or your workspace. And if anybody wants to share in the chat what that was like, you're welcome to. You do not have to. I'll ask you to just think about, what did you notice? And I'm going to guess that you noticed some things in your body that you weren't paying attention to before. How often do we take a moment to scan our body and say, what's going on? Some things might have felt pleasant, some things might have felt unpleasant, some things might have felt neutral. All of those are okay. The goal here is not to judge those. The goal is to increase our awareness. This is one of the ways to improve our emotion regulation, which is helpful for everybody, but it's particularly helpful for kids who have been through stress, trauma, transitions, where there's a lot of uncertainty. So you can see how this ties in very nicely to serving foster youth. That's our first exercise for today. I want to walk through a couple of statistics that you're probably aware of because you're here. You probably already have understood that there's close to 500,000 youth in foster care who are currently in foster care. There's an overrepresentation of children of color in foster care. So Black children in particular, and Latinx children. We also know that there's an overrepresentation of LGBTQ youth in foster care. This is just a snippet of the diversity of youth in foster care, but I'm calling your attention to these cultural considerations as we think about how do we best serve foster care youth. What are some of the things that might come to mind? They're a very diverse group of youth, and there are definitely some special considerations. And I appreciate those of you chatting about how that experience was. I know it sometimes takes a moment to type, so I appreciate your reflections on that. Also not a surprise are the great mental health needs of youth who are in foster care. So just in general, youth who need mental health services in the US don't receive it adequately, especially right now. These studies are done well before the pandemic, well before Black Lives Matter, well before many of the social and racial injustices that are happening, let alone other traumas that are happening now. That have led to months-long waiting lists, sometimes even longer waiting lists to get mental health services. And foster youth, not surprisingly, have even less access to healthcare. Again, unfortunately, and not surprisingly to this group, is that kids who are in foster care are at an increased risk of experiencing stress and trauma and having traumatic stress symptoms, PTSD, and other significant mental health symptoms. So all of that as a reminder of why somatic approaches might be particularly helpful, both as a prevention and as an intervention. So I know there's a lot of different backgrounds here. I want to give a quick either refresher or explanation of our sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system, because this ties into what some of you experienced when we did that body scan. This ties into what some of you experienced when you did the mindfulness activity. When you are able to take a deep breath, your parasympathetic nervous system switches on. And all of a sudden, my heart rate is getting slower. My flow of saliva is increased, so I can start to digest better. My breathing is able to be deeper and longer and not be constricted. Now, we're all not in the same room, but we're in some room, right? You may be by yourselves or with some colleagues. And if something scary were to happen right now, an earthquake, saber-toothed tiger walks in the door, all of a sudden our sympathetic nervous system is going to turn on. Our pupils are going to dilate so we can really hone in on what we need to hone in on. We're going to become hyper-focused on getting to safety. Our digestive system is going to turn, super, super slow so that we can get all of our energy into our muscles so that we can fight, flight, or freeze in response to not being safe. Our breathing is going to get shallower, and our really focused energy and our focused neurotransmitters are going to help us get back to safety. So again, if it's fight, flight, freeze response to the earthquake or the saber-toothed tiger, whatever scarier of the examples for you. An interesting thing about this is we don't have control over most of these things, right? I don't get to decide how big my pupils are right now. I have no idea how big they are unless I look at my own camera. I do get control over my breath, which is why so many of these exercises focus on the breath and breathing and having a big belly breath rather than short, shallow breaths up in the chest. So these are pieces of the puzzle to think about as why might our somatic cues help us figure out what's going on. Maybe when you get butterflies in your stomach as a result of anxiety, that might actually be our sympathetic nervous system giving us a clue as to something. And for many of us, we can sense that before we can actually say, oh, I'm actually really nervous right now. If you take a moment and pause into what's going on inside you. So childhood trauma, which most, if not all, of our foster youth have been through, has a wide variety of impacts on mental health and well-being. Sometimes there's developmental challenges. Sometimes there's an impaired sense of safety, impaired sense of social connectedness, and poor emotional regulation. And the emotional experience of the traumatic stress is stored inside of our body. And that's where our neural circuits are created. And it's more likely that the body will react in similar ways when it perceives a threat. So if it reacts and gets very, very stressed over a traumatic or stressful situation, when there's a small stressor, it's more likely that our bodies will react in the same way, even when there's not as big of a stressor. And typically, as a psychologist, as a person who's worked in community mental health, as a person who works in an academic medical center, treatment focuses on this cognitive experience of trauma. So this talk-based therapy of exposure therapy and EMDR, kind of the two big forms of therapy. And talk therapy is not the end-all be-all to managing stress. It's not the end-all be-all to reducing trauma symptoms. It does a lot of good things, but there's also a lot of problems with talk therapy. Talk therapy doesn't work for every single cultural group. A lot of our clinical trials have been done with very small groups of very homogenous types of people. And there's not always a piece of cultural sensitivity, cultural responsibility to each person that's in the room. Sometimes it's manualized in a way that is so specific that it actually becomes culturally insensitive. Also, not everybody feels safe to talk about their traumatic experiences, their stressful experiences, their challenging experiences. Sometimes there needs to be a restoration of safety to get to the point of even being able to think about talk therapy or other types of traditional forms of therapy. So I'm kind of lumping a bunch of somatic approaches together. I'm going to highlight a lot of the trauma resiliency model and somatic experiencing, but this is very similar to yoga, other forms of mindful movements, and then other somatic approaches as well. So I gave you some of these adjectives as we were doing our body scan. And this is meant to start to increase one's vocabulary of how do I notice what's going on inside of my body? What types of words might I use? If I have a sensation in my stomach and it feels round and prickly and kind of wavy, that's very different than a sensation that's in my shoulder that feels constricted and cold and tingly. And those may or may not be words that are coming to your mind right away. So I invite you to do our next activity, which is to look around your space and just grab any old object that you have in your space. I'm going to grab a paper clip, but you might grab a pen, a Post-it, a piece of paper, might be part of your clothing if you don't have anything else. It could be your phone. Sure, you have some sort of object around you. And I'm going to invite you to reflect on this. And you're welcome to share in the chat if you want, but you don't have to. What words would you use to describe your object? So I have a paper clip. I would describe this as rigid, yet bendy, sharp, with rounded edges. It's also cool to the touch, and it's flexible. So not all those words, I don't think most of those words were on this chart. So as you can see, these are just an example. And you can see some of them contradicted one another, the sharp and the rounded, but that's okay. It's a paper clip. It can be sharp and rounded. So can your internal sensations. So I'll be quiet for a few seconds so you can think about the words you would use to describe your object. Thank you for the comment. Prickly, bumpy, cool. I was describing a pineapple. My guess is not everybody has a pineapple on their desk, but that's a great object to describe. I'm going to move us along. Smooth and cool. Thank you. This could actually be a game, right? We could start to describe it to each other and try to guess what the object is. So somatic treatment, specifically, this is from the yoga research, has shown to reduce physiological effects of stress, promote pro-social behaviors, and strengthen relationships, which are the very domains that are impacted by childhood trauma. What we're trying to do here is, you may have seen this idea of a window of tolerance. And this is something that everybody has. And this is our impact of stress or activation or deactivation. And within those two lines is our tolerable zone. It's our safety zone. It's where we can be our best selves. We might feel a little bit stressed or a little bit anxious or a little bit sad. but we're able to handle it. We're able to still function. We're able to still go to school, interact with our loved ones, able to do our jobs. This makes sense, right? Like a little bit of stress, not a big deal. I can handle that. A little bit of competing deadlines, I can handle that. This is our window of tolerance. Somebody asked about elaborating on pro-social behaviors. I appreciate that because pro-social behaviors are one of the ways that we can improve our window of tolerance because that helps with our social supports. These are things such as being able to effectively communicate with one another, to not be aggressive in communication, not be passive in communication, but to be able to be assertive, provide compliments, express gratitude. This is also being a good team player. So not being selfish and also not being the person who doesn't contribute. Basically, like the ability to get along with others, be a good friend, be a good colleague, be a good family. So going back to our window of tolerance, this is the same kind of graphic right here. But when there's a stressor or something that is traumatic, that can really knock us out of our safety zone, of our window of tolerance. So maybe for a little bit, I'm okay. But once I really start feeling the impact of that stressor, that traumatic events, I might get outside of my window of tolerance and be stuck on off, or I might be knocked out and get stuck on. And what do I mean by that? I mean being pretty depressed, pretty exhausted, pretty much in pain. My digestive system isn't working. Why? Because of those physiological responses. And you can get stuck in that zone so much so that your functioning in your everyday life is impacted. Likewise, you can get stuck on the opposite side of your window of tolerance, where you're hyper vigilant, you're very anxious, you can't sit still, you're overly emotional. You'll see some of these have like pain is in both on and off. That might make sense, right? If you're feeling so lethargic and down that you're intensifying your pain, and if you're feeling so anxious and panicked and up, that might also intensify your pain. So the only thing I would change about this graphic is I don't like normal range. I like to call this our window of tolerance or our safety zone. I think normal makes it sound like coming up to be stuck on or stuck on off is not normal. It is normal. We are aiming to have a bigger window of tolerance, but when there's something that is very stressful or traumatic, it would be abnormal to not go up to on or down to off. So these are some of the somatic skills that are very common in somatic approaches. I'm going to briefly talk about them, and we can go into more depth if there's questions on them. And then there's some great resources on all of these. So we did a little bit of grounding in that first activity, which is the really having a physical presence and safety. Oftentimes it's a connection with the earth or a connection with another object. So you could press the bottom of your feet into the ground. You could also notice the sensation if you're sitting on a chair of the parts of your body that are on the chair. You could press your hands into your table, your laptop, your thighs. All of those are examples of grounding. Tracking is really what we did when we did the body scan. It's turning your awareness internally and noticing what's going on. Notice that it says noticing. There's no judgment on what's going on. Why am I having a hard time focusing on this? Why does my brain keep going off to my to-do list whenever one of these presenters asks us to do one of these exercises? It's those judgments are not part of the activity. If they do happen while you're engaging in these activities, you notice that the judgment has happened and gently invite that thought to float away as you return to your noticing of what's going on inside of your body. We won't talk in great detail about the rest of the skills, but resourcing is recognizing that everybody has both internal and external resources. The more resources we have, the wider
Money.
our window.
Okay, so Robbie's here, and
internal and external resources can be built upon. People have these in every person has these to begin with, and then they can be added upon. So they're not things that are set in stone that can never ever change. Titration is the idea of an internal awareness of something that is not comfortable or something that is activated, and taking a little tiny piece of that at a time, not overwhelming somebody with the painful experience or the sharp experience or the uncomfortable experience that's happening inside of their body. Pendulation, Dr. Belzer actually alluded to this, which is going back and forth between a more activated place and a resource place. And I'm talking about within one's physical body here, and shifting back and forth. And then the final part of this is a restoration or discharge. And this is the way that our bodies discharge energy. This has happened whether or not you've known it before, but sometimes you might feel like you're just a little jumpy and you need to move around a little bit. That might be releasing of some stored energy. If you've ever shook your hands and then had them stay still and just felt that release of energy, that's part of what we're talking about. If you've ever had the sensation to move, to run or walk or move your body in another way, and it's like, this isn't normal for me. Normally at 2:30 on a Tuesday, that's not my normal time to feel like I need to get up and move. That might be your body saying, I need to discharge some of this stress. I need to discharge some of this extra energy. So I have two more brief activities. The first one is our feeling thermometer. This is a scale of comfortability and uncomfortability. Notice the words are not good or bad. Notice the words are not calm and mad, because you might feel a little bit mad and be a little bit uncomfortable, maybe in that yellow zone. Or you might be really, really, really mad and really, really, really uncomfortable and be in that red zone. So this is a very brief activity, which is to just notice what's going on inside of right now for you. Are you feeling very, very comfortable, a little uncomfortable, pretty uncomfortable, or very uncomfortable? I'd say right now I'm probably in the yellow zone. I'm a little uncomfortable. I'm talking to about 100 people today, hopefully giving you all some good information and having some good exercises, but it's hard on Zoom. I can't see your faces. I can't see if you're understanding this or paying attention or into these activities. So it makes me a little uncomfortable, but not so uncomfortable that I can't focus, which would be up here. Not so uncomfortable that I'm paralyzed and can't speak with you all today. So just notice where you are right now. Our final activity is an orienting exercise. And for this, I'll ask you again to get comfortable. You can be sitting or standing, doesn't matter to me. And to start, I'll ask you to look at wherever your screen is, if it's in front of you. If you're on your phone, if you could raise up your phone so that your neck is relatively straight. And look forward onto the screen, and then gently move your gaze and your body towards the left. Look to the left and move your body slowly, slowly, slowly to the left. Notice objects in your room. Is there a water bottle, a wall, a doorknob, a plant, some markers, and look all the way to one side. And then gently turn your gaze and your body slowly back to center. Look at the screen again. And then turn your gaze the opposite direction, noticing what's in your space. A lamp, a picture, a ball, the wall, a yoga mat. Look all around your space and gently turn your body, bringing your gaze back to center. And if you'd like to, go ahead and bring your chin, your nose, your eyes up to the sky. What does your ceiling look like? Only looking up as far as your neck is comfortable. Then bring your gaze back down to neutral. Your nose, your neck, your chin back to neutral. And if you'd like to, you can tuck your chin, bring your eyes down to the ground, look down, looking down only as far as is comfortable for your neck and your shoulders. Look down. What's on your floor? How are your feet doing? When you're ready, slowly bring your gaze back to neutral. This can be very helpful if you are finding that you're getting yourself up on high or down on low, to just say, let's just bring my attention back to right now. What's going on here? If you are working with somebody who is dissociating or feeling like they're coming out of their bodies, if you're working with somebody who's becoming overly activated, or maybe you just need a nice transition to whatever you're doing next, that can be a good way to transition into your space. It lets your mind know I'm safe. I can identify these different objects that are in my space. I'm aware of what's going on around me, and I'm safe here. So a nice little transition exercise, which can also be a part of your own professional well-being, especially those who are doing work that are outside of a traditional office. If you're moving from space to space or meeting to meeting, you even help from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting. These are a couple of the places where you can find out some more information about the work that I do. Some of the resources that I mentioned are also listed here, as well as my email. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marlowe. I'm now pleased to introduce our second speaker, Joyce Lee. Joyce Lee, MPH, is a medical student at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. She's passionate about the health of vulnerable populations and is especially grateful for the mentorship of Elizabeth Barnard, MD, MPH, MS, in the Department of Pediatrics. She hopes to integrate public health policy with clinical experience to bring health justice to vulnerable populations in her career.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here and excited to share a little bit about what's been going on. Thank you, Dr. Marlowe. That was very relaxing to kind of go through all the exercises. Kind of an introduction. I am a now fourth year medical student. And I had the pleasure working with Dr. Barnard. It was kind of a serendipitous kind of meeting. There was an organization called Swan Within, and I'll talk a little bit more about the community organization, but its founder, Meredith Harper Houston, had reached out to Dr. Barnard right around the same time that I had reached out to Dr. Barnard. I had been interested in women's health kind of during my time before medical school, and Miss Meredith Harper Houston kind of reached out saying, hey, we have this program that teaches dance to young girls, now expanding to include all sorts of different gender identities, who have been in the juvenile justice kind of system, kind of stuck in the system, who had been experiencing or had experienced sexual exploitation, trafficking, just a whole host of violence. And there's this program that introduced dance as a way to kind of cope with the aftermath of their trauma. Reached out to Dr. Barnard saying, hey, we wanted to partner and kind of delve into what sort of information is out there in the academic world that might help us and help this program kind of continue to progress. So that's kind of where our research kind of came in. That's how UCLA kind of fit into the picture. And I'm happy to kind of tell you a little bit about the journey starting that serendipitous meeting. So let me share my screen and get this out. So we had partnered with Swan Within, and kind of just no disclosures, kind of a background to start with. So sexual violence, as we all know, is a pretty prevalent, significant public health concern. It's listed as one of the adverse childhood experiences defined by the CDC. Very destructive, long-lasting effects on physical and mental health that's been documented multiple times. This on the left are just a couple of stats to kind of contextualize sexual violence. So more than 1 in 3 women have experienced sexual violence in her lifetime, and that's nearly 1 in 4 men. There's actually research saying that's an understated statistic. The prevalence of sexual violence against children, this is just a graph of the different types of sexual violence that children might have experienced. Here again, you can see that statistic, more than 1 in every 3 girls have experienced some form of sexual violence during childhood. Long-lasting effects, I mean, the more immediate consequences, genital trauma, bruises, broken bones, more immediate kind of consequences, physical consequences, but there's been research into the long-term effects, mental health effects, depression, PTSD, the inability to kind of be able to regulate different emotions. Just very destructive in one's life. Go to the next slide. More close to home. So in 2019, California alone, there were more than 8,000 people that were reported as victims of labor or sexual exploitation. Just kind of some statistics as to how marginalized populations kind of play into these numbers. So about 40% of victims of human trafficking are African-American in the United States. And in LA, that rate can reach to over 90%. Aging out of the foster care system makes youth a lot more vulnerable to sex trafficking. Other things to be aware of: victims of childhood sexual abuse are more vulnerable to later, what CSEX stands for is commercial sexual exploitation of children, than non-abused peers. And it's been estimated that more than 25% of homeless LGBTQ children are CSEC victims. So Swan Within, their mission is to give these youth in the LA community the opportunity to reclaim their lives and achieve a degree of healing through dance, namely ballet. It was founded by Meredith Harper Houston in 2016. There's a completion rate of almost 194% completion rate. And that program is starting to help incarcerated and foster care youth kind of regain their ownership of their bodies, increase their self-esteem, improve life choices. And these are a couple quotes on the left here that kind of illustrates what has been going on within the program. Quote, "Your class allows me to feel more connected with myself mentally and spiritually. I feel beautiful, like I'm more than a girl in jail, learning from the mistakes that brought me here." So kind of what's this area of dance movement therapy? It was pioneered by Marion Chase back in the 1960s. It's basically the psychotherapeutic use of movement to promote integration across emotional, social, cognitive, and physical realms for the individual. Purpose being improving health and well-being. Basically, it's the idea of connecting symbolism, physical symbolism, with expressive movement. And it's designed to promote what is called the mind-body integration, the mind-body connection. There's a growing body, it definitely needs more research, but there's a growing body of clinical and basic science evidence that supports this mind-body connection that we've talked about here today. These are just kind of 3 bullets of the nitty-gritty. There's a lot of research that goes into kind of the neuromodulatory, immunomodulatory effects of the mind-body connection. There's been studies into the HPA axis and its link in the mind-body connection as well. And as we've talked about, there's a lot of research to support movement and physical activity to improve mental health and mood. So kind of integrating all this, current research already illustrates that 1, physical movement can promote positive mental health outcomes. 2, emotional experiences have this bodily somatic component. And 3, trauma specifically can reshape neurobiology through the HPA axis. So kind of taking all these 3 points together, it stands to reason that the body is a very important target of treatment for sexual trauma. And we've seen, not just with Swan Within, but across the nation and even globally, the use of dance to address sexual trauma is already far-reaching. But there hasn't been a lot of research into the existing evidence for therapeutic dance as an intervention. So that's kind of where we stepped in, said we wanted to conduct a systematic review to summarize what is that evidence out there for therapeutic dance as an intervention for healing after sexual trauma. Nitty-gritty, I don't want to go too much into the details here, but like I said, we partnered with members of Swan Within. We used PRISMA guidelines. We searched 5 major academic databases for whatever research is already out there about therapeutic dance. On the right here is a little bit more about the search terms, exclusion criteria of what studies we included and didn't include. Feel free to ask me questions if you have any questions about the methods. In total, after kind of reading through the databases, selecting articles based off of the inclusion exclusion criteria, we found 11 studies that met all of our criteria. And this is a brief overview of those 11 studies. The things I do want to point out, the studies that have been out there describe a diverse group setting, so diverse participant settings. Some of them were case studies, some of them were studies within groups. Different patient populations across different nations. Study participant ages also ranged from 11 to 67 years old, both males and females. I do want to point out that 7 of the 11 studies that we found included participants who had faced childhood sexual abuse. And this is where I want to kind of emphasize that there is varying terminology that was used in our study. Particularly, we kind of use sexual trauma as the umbrella term to include experiences like rape, sexual abuse, human sex trafficking, and dating violence. This is just a chart. Essentially, what we found and what we grouped the results of the study is that we found therapeutic dance has a positive influence on affect, interpersonal relationships, and concepts of the self. So I want to first go into affect. We defined affect as kind of the emotional well-being of the participants who participated in therapeutic dance. Different subdomains, improved self-awareness of emotion, improved expression of emotion, and improved regulation of emotion. And we found that all studies somewhat commented on affect as being a potential benefit for therapeutic dance. And I wanted to share for each of these domains some quotes from the participants that I thought were particularly powerful. These are some quotes related to affect. Dance therapy was one of the first experiences of discovering how much was stored in my body. It was a powerful way of getting connected to myself. I like the feeling that dance brings to us. When I feel the anguish, I sing and dance, and so it dissolves. This feeling goes away and I feel light. Another thing that dance helped with was being able to help participants to show the emotions some ways that words don't always help with. Quote, I don't have to just say how I feel, I can show how I feel. Another domain was interpersonal relationships. Kind of how did therapeutic dance help with participants to form boundaries with others? What was the experience of interpersonal relationships like after participating in dance? Some representative quotes. I thought this was particularly powerful. It's like you're trying to work it out, like you can get control. You can be like, stop there. You're not scared to say, stop, you're too close. Particularly in the group setting, we found that interpersonal relationships was more pronounced as a benefit. Quote, I felt like I got to watch other people walk through my experience, and it was like they were experiencing my life with me. Seeing and hearing their emotions made me feel seen. It was very powerful. Another domain that we found benefit in is the self. A couple of the subdomains here. What I want to emphasize is the sense of freedom and safety, improved bodily awareness. There was a more positive future orientation that we recognized, and there was this element of self-empowerment that participants had talked about in these studies. Some representative quotes. There's a lot here, but what I want to kind of emphasize is highlighted here. Since then, I remember the beatings and the sexual abuse, but the pain isn't attached to it anymore. I'm not re-experiencing the pain with every memory. Some evidence of positive future orientation after experiencing something traumatic. I want to work with kids. I want to run groups like this too. When I work with kids, I could teach them the stuff that you teach us. Even more, so the better that I dance, the more that I've healed. And it just kind of expands to the rest of your life, so that the rest of your life goes back to that sense of being on your own axis, so that as things come at you and hit you, you know where your emotional center is. Kind of the key findings that we found were that these studies show therapeutic dance provides healing in affect, concepts of the self, and interpersonal relationships. These studies also further support engagement of the mind-body connection as a possible mechanism of efficacy. I do want to point this out. There were potential risks of triggers that were brought upon during these interventions. The idea that certain movements, certain sounds, certain emotions that were raised during the dance intervention triggered flashbacks and whatnot. These participants in all these studies that mentioned this potential risk of triggers also mentioned that these moments of triggering were mediated by therapeutic dance itself. So in other words, participants were able to turn to therapeutic dance to manage and emotionally regulate these moments of triggering. Another key finding was its adaptability to various cultural contexts. Like I said earlier, the studies kind of spanned all sorts of different contexts. Some of them were in group homes, some of them after school programs, some of them in inpatient rehab centers. So there's a lot of adaptability culturally as well. Some studies in the US and Canada, other studies in Africa, and kind of all the different continents of this world. Notably, studies also suggested that therapeutic dance could be a complementary treatment modality to talk therapy. A lot of the participants often quoted how talk therapy was often difficult to verbalize their experiences with trauma, but instead therapeutic dance allowed a different modality for expressing their emotions. Just a couple of limitations. They're listed here. Our concept for sexual trauma was broad. Like I said, we use it as an umbrella term for many different gender-based violence experiences. Therapeutic dance is also heavily explored through what we call gray literature. They don't necessarily fit the category of interventional research, but it is heavily explored through gray literature that we didn't include in this study. Limited to studies in English, we should also kind of limit our interpretation for how adaptable this is across different cultures. So that kind of points us towards where does the research stand right now, and what are some ways that we can further research priorities. So for one, we need more rigorous research methods. There are some interventional studies that don't necessarily meet the criteria for rigorous research methods. So just something to think about. Other things to think about is kind of understanding what are the effective and not ineffective components of therapeutic dance. Is it the music? Is it the dance, the type of music, the type of dance? The facilitators who are organizing these interventions, what are the effective and non-effective components? How critical is that physical nature and physical exercise a part of for these therapeutic dance interventions? It's also unclear the degree of adaptation across culture, age, setting, type of sexual trauma. So that's something we want to explore further on. And importantly, we want to understand how do gender identities and age and contextualize therapeutic dance interventions. So something also to think about in the future. So kind of as a whole though, conclusion, therapeutic dance, it is a promising intervention for those who've experienced sexual trauma. Something to think about as well is that the majority of these studies included participants who had experienced child sexual abuse. So we hope that studies like this one can be used to incorporate therapeutic dance as a possible treatment modality for those who've been subject to sexual violence. Want to thank Bethany Myers, our librarian, who helped with kind of the strategy behind this research project. Of course, Swan Within that works tirelessly to teach therapeutic dance for our youth in LA. And of course, the UCLA Pritzker Center, for which this work was not be possible. And that's kind of where we stand with therapeutic dance. Thank you for your time. And I am happy to take any questions that there might be. Oh, I see a question here. How did I get interested in this topic? I am actually not a dancer. I was a coach. I was a boxing coach for a while I was tutoring for women who had been subject to sexual violence over on the East Coast. I just started boxing around that same time, and I just become certified for boxing and introduced boxing to these women, and they kind of shared how freeing it was to not just be kind of in a counseling session, talk therapy session, but to have these boxing sessions to just have fun and get movement going and find a sense of self through this hobby. And that kind of introduced me to this idea of, oh, there's this definitely the somatic component, there's this bodily component to these experiences. Why not kind of explore all these other options besides boxing that incorporate these bodily movements for the healing of sexual trauma? So that's how I got interested. I wish I was a dancer.
Thank you so much, Joyce.